Have you ever walked through a place that once shaped history, only to find it eerily silent? What if I told you that the most strategic naval base of the Cold War, once teeming with aircraft carriers and salutes from uniformed men, was almost forgotten, until one quiet return changed everything? It started with a man named Daniel Reyes, a Filipino-American defense consultant. Not a general, not a diplomat, just a man, half-retired, half-curious, who hadn't been back to Subic Bay in over 25 years. He arrived in early morning mist, stepping onto what used to be the heart of American power in Southeast Asia. But instead of sirens or flags, he was greeted by the sound of rustling palm leaves and waves tapping against rusted docks. Subic, once thunderous with warships, was quiet. Too quiet. And then something odd caught his eye. Near the old dry dock, he noticed a group of South Korean engineers huddled over a blueprint. One of them looked up and nodded respectfully. "We're here to build again," the man said with a smile. "The world is watching this bay." Daniel blinked. Build what? And why here? He walked further and saw more flags. Japan, Australia, even India. Quiet presence, subtle logos. He later learned that these weren't just tourists or random investors. They were representatives of global powers, military contractors, shipping magnates, diplomats in plain clothes, and they were all returning to Subic. The base that had once symbolized American dominance was now becoming something else, something even bigger. A symbol of shifting global alliances, of new tensions in the Pacific, of a region preparing for storms no one wants to name, but everyone feels. Daniel stood there, overwhelmed, not by noise, but by a sense of awakening. How could a place be this silent, yet this loud with meaning? And that's when he saw it. A small handwritten sign nailed to an old post by the bay. It read, in faded ink, "We never left. We just waited." He didn't know who wrote it. No logo, no military crest, just a message. And it chilled him more than any fighter jet ever could, because it wasn't just about land or ships. It was about timing, about who would return first, and why. You see, Subic Bay isn't just a dot on a map. It's a test, a pulse point. And this quiet comeback? It's not so quiet anymore. As Daniel took a deep breath, he felt something shift in him. This wasn't just nostalgia, it was a warning. And perhaps a calling. But who's calling? And what are they preparing for? You're about to find out. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling. The image of that faded sign, "We never left, we just waited," kept playing in his mind like a distant echo. It wasn't just poetic, it was a clue, a message layered with geopolitical meaning. That afternoon, he found himself sitting in a small cafe overlooking the harbor, sipping kapeng barako. The waitress, a young woman named Leah, pointed out toward the water. "You see that ship?" she asked. "It's not Filipino, it's Japanese. They've been docking here for months." Daniel leaned forward. "Why?" Leah shrugged, but her answer struck deeper than she realized. "They say war doesn't start with guns anymore. It starts with ports." Suddenly, the silence of Subic Bay felt less like abandonment and more like a pause before the next move. That evening, Daniel met an old friend from his days in Washington, Colonel Raymond Liu, now a security advisor stationed in Manila. They hadn't spoken in years, but the timing was perfect. Over dinner, Daniel shared what he had seen. Raymond didn't smile. He just nodded. "Subic is a chessboard now, Dan, and every power with an eye on the South China Sea has a piece on it." He pulled out his phone and showed Daniel a map. Dotted across the screen were dozens of markers, each representing recent foreign ship movements, commercial leases, or joint training exercises. Japan had increased its maritime visits, Australia signed port access agreements. India was quietly funding infrastructure upgrades. And the U.S.? The U.S. had never really let go. They never did, Raymond said, tapping a dot near the former U.S. Naval Air Station. There are storage units here, officially empty, but intel says otherwise. Daniel looked at the map again, feeling both awe and concern. What are they preparing for? Raymond sighed. You know how the Pacific used to be called America's Lake? That lake is boiling now, and Subic sits right on the edge. Suddenly, Subic wasn't just a strategic asset. It was a pressure valve, a place where silence meant activity and calm meant preparation. And just when Daniel thought it couldn't get more intense, Raymond dropped the real shock. We've intercepted communications. Chinese interest in Zambales real estate is spiking. Quiet purchases, undisclosed buyers, some near the old logistics hubs. It's not coincidence. Daniel felt a chill down his spine. China was closing in. It wasn't an invasion. It was something more elegant. Strategic patience, economic infiltration, infrastructure diplomacy. And Subic? Subic was the ultimate prize, not just for its deep harbor or historical symbolism, but because it was neutral ground that could tip the balance of the entire Indo-Pacific. For decades, Subic had been an American echo. Now, it was becoming a battleground of whispers. Daniel left the meeting with a new urgency. He walked back toward the docks. And this time, the rust and decay didn't feel like signs of decline. They felt like camouflage, masking a quiet race that had already begun. Underneath the palm trees, behind the chain-link fences, in the corners of old hangars, something was being rebuilt. Not just ships, not just alliances, a whole new version of the Philippines, one that global powers were not only watching, but investing in, betting on. And Daniel realized this wasn't just Subic's comeback, it was the country's. But at what cost? And who truly benefits when a forgotten base becomes the center of the world again? Those answers were waiting just beyond the horizon. By now, Daniel was seeing Subic Bay with entirely new eyes. The rusted docks weren't remnants of the past. They were placeholders. The foreign ships weren't anomalies. They were signals. But perhaps the most powerful revelation didn't come from a general, or a consultant, or a foreign dignitary. It came from a group of teenagers. On his third day, Daniel wandered into a converted warehouse near the old naval barracks. The structure had been gutted, but inside, it buzzed with activity. Students, Filipino students, were seated around repurposed engine blocks, coding on laptops, assembling robotic arms, designing port security simulations using open-source tools. Their teacher, a wiry man in his early 40s, introduced himself as Mr. Clemente. "We call this the Subic Youth Lab," he said. "This used to be a military garage. Now it's our launchpad." "Launchpad for what?" Daniel asked. "For the new guardians of this bay," Clemente replied, eyes burning with conviction. He walked Daniel through their vision. A future where the people of Zambales weren't just bystanders watching foreign powers circle their home, but participants, architects, innovators, protectors. One project simulated tsunami response coordination with naval assets. Another tracked illegal fishing vessels using cheap drone tech. A third group was modeling the movement of oil tankers to prevent sabotage or environmental damage. "They think we're only useful as labor," Clemente said quietly. "But we've been watching, learning. We know who's building what, who's docking where, and more importantly, who's pretending to help." Daniel was stunned. This wasn't resistance. It wasn't nationalism. It was ownership, and it was intelligent, coordinated, and fearless. He turned to one of the students, Anna, a 17-year-old who spoke with measured confidence. "We know the Bay is changing," she said, "and we don't mind foreign partners, but we won't let them write the story without us." Daniel nodded slowly. "That sign I saw near the dock, it said, We never left. We just waited. Was that you? Anna smiled. Maybe. And just like that, the story shifted again. It wasn't just about global powers betting on Subic. It was about who was brave enough to shape the terms of that bet. Later that evening, Daniel sat near the shoreline, watching the sun dip behind the hills. He saw families walking, kids flying kites, elders sitting in silence. To most of them, the return of foreign interest felt distant, abstract. But to the few who had seen the rise and fall, the departure of the Americans, the economic slump, the broken promises, they knew something deeper. That sovereignty isn't declared through speeches, it's preserved through vigilance. Subic Bay had always been defined by who showed up first. Now, it was being redefined by who refused to disappear. Daniel looked out at the harbor and saw not just warships or investors. He saw young minds taking control of their future. He saw a teacher turning scraps into software. He saw a girl, barely old enough to vote, daring to challenge the shape of foreign power. And in that moment, he knew. Subic's comeback wasn't about rebuilding an old empire. It was about building something no empire could own. The question now wasn't who would return to Subic. It was who would rise from it. And Daniel? He was no longer just a visitor. He was part of the story now. 2 weeks later, the silence broke. It began with a radar ping, an unauthorized vessel entering Philippine waters just off the Scarborough Shoal. Not a rare event these days. But this time the ship didn't veer away. It anchored. Then came the drones, low-flying, unmarked, circling over Palawan and the western coast. Official statements were vague. Routine surveillance, some said. A miscommunication, others claimed. But those who knew, those like Daniel, Raymond, and Mr. Clemente, they felt the shift in the air. This wasn't posturing, this was probing. Daniel received a secure call late at night. It was Raymond. "They're testing the seams," he said. "Not attacking, not yet, but they're watching who flinches." And the real question wasn't whether the Philippines had enough ships or missiles. It was whether it had clarity, resolve, direction. That morning, Daniel returned to the youth lab, but this time it wasn't a tour, it was a war room. Anna had already pulled up satellite images, 3 suspicious vessels, multiple flyovers, increased chatter on military frequencies. "No one's panicking yet," she said. "That's the dangerous part." Daniel looked around. These weren't children anymore. They were scouts, analysts, watchmen. And then it happened. A small Philippine Coast Guard ship approached the unknown vessel near Scarborough to make contact. Standard protocol. But before it could hail, it was hit with a high-powered water cannon, damaging its radar system and forcing it to retreat. The images spread fast. The world watched. Some expected the Philippines to fold, to back down quietly as it had in years past. But this time, something different happened. Within 48 hours, the Japanese and Australian navies conducted joint exercises near Subic, officially unrelated, unofficially symbolic. The U.S. Embassy released a terse statement. India signaled support for maritime freedom. But the real response didn't come from global powers. It came from Subic itself. Thousands of locals, fishermen, students, elders, veterans, gathered by the docks in a silent demonstration. No flags, no chants, just presence. One by one, they laid white stones at the foot of the harbor wall. Each stone bore a name, a memory, a silent vow. Daniel stood among them, his hand resting on a stone that read simply, "For tomorrow." And in that moment, it was clear, this wasn't about militarization or foreign bases. It was about legacy, about a bay that had been passed like a chess piece for generations, now refusing to be played. That night, Daniel drafted his final report. But he didn't send it to Washington. He sent it to the Youth Council of Olongapo. He titled it, Subic, the Front Line of Conscious Sovereignty. In his closing line, he wrote, I came looking for strategy. I found something deeper, a nation not defined by its alliances, but by its refusal to be anyone's pawn again. Daniel left Subic 2 days later. But this time he didn't feel like he was leaving. He felt like he'd been sent, carrying a story the world needed to hear. And Subic Bay? It was no longer a comeback story. It was the opening chapter of something far more powerful. A people who remembered, a nation that watched, and a harbor that now spoke louder than any gun ever could. If this story stirred something in you, if Subic Bay reminded you that even forgotten places carry the weight of nations, then don't let this moment pass. Share this video, not just with Filipinos, but with anyone who still believes that sovereignty isn't a slogan, it's a responsibility.